Hello there. Okay, the question is, we've tried to prove that God exists through design, morality, and causation. Well, the question is, can we prove that God doesn't exist? And of course, we're going to refer to Mr. Dawkins in a second, and he's going to try and show you a way that philosophers have tried to prove that God doesn't exist. And then we're going to, of course, hear the counter-arguments to that, and actually see whether we can argue against the idea. And the idea is the God of the gaps. Do religious people just fill in gaps in their knowledge that they don't understand with God? Or is there something more? It's going to be over to you.
Hello. Well, here I am, Richard Dawkins, in the first part of this unit. This idea that can we prove that God actually doesn't exist? And I've come up, or speaking to you about this idea that has been put forward. And that is that all that God is a worship of the gaps. There isn't a worship of God, but a worship of the gaps. And it's called the God of the gaps. Now let me just explain it to you. Many years ago, people would assume that God was doing certain things that we now know is part of the natural world. For example, earthquakes. Earthquakes were seen by primitive human beings as being something that made God angry. And so we can now see, however, that it is not God being angry, but the tectonic plates moving. And indeed, things like the word sunrise. The sun does not rise. It stays where it is, in the same place. It is the earth that spins, making it look as though the sun actually rises in the sky. Ancient people used to believe that God would drag the sun around the earth when they believed that the earth was the center of the universe. The sun would be dragged by the sun god, and so the sun rose and set and rose again the next day. And now we know, as the world is round, that the world is spinning, and science has helped us to understand the actual meaning of the word sunrise, even though it doesn't rise. And so we now understand that there is no God involved. But because we didn't understand it before, we put God in the gap. God in the gap of our knowledge. Now this may be true even today, where some people don't understand certain things that happen. For example, people do not understand about God seemingly performing miracles. When he does perform those miracles, we now think that, wait a minute, are we sure that it's God? Maybe it's just a gap in our knowledge that we will come to understand in the future. So remember what I've said, that there is no such thing as God. Only God is a worship of the gaps. But ladies and gentlemen, you will have to work it out for yourselves.
Okay, that was Mr. Dawkins, ladies and gentlemen, and he told us about the God of the gaps idea. Earthquakes and the sun rising, and I'm sure you can think of many other things that people have referred to as being God. But also, can we now argue against that? Here's Pope John Paul with 2 reasons why that might not actually be the case.
Hello, Mr. Dawkins. I am Pope John Paul II, and I have been asked to argue against you and your God of the Gaps idea. Well, of course, it's a good idea, but I'm afraid, Mr. Dawkins, there are some things that are just miracles. For Christianity, these are things like people who are miraculously cured at Lourdes, and also things that we fundamentally believe in. For example, Jesus rising from the dead is a definite miracle that cannot be explained by just a gap in our knowledge. This actually happened, and is where God comes down and violates and breaks the laws of nature. And many religious people all over the world believe in it. And that's my second argument against your idea that we are just filling in gaps in our knowledge. Millions of people all over the world believe in these miracle events, these wonderful events, that, yes, whilst the sun does not rise anymore, You cannot explain things like Jesus rising from the dead, or Muhammad being taken up to heaven, or in other religious traditions, miraculous, amazingly, truly remarkable events that mean that only one thing could have happened, and that was that God got involved in the lives of humanity. And yes, you're right, we can't explain them now, and we will never be able to explain them. The biggest one, as I say, for Christianity is the resurrection of Jesus, an impossible event, but no understanding of any gap will lead us to believe that God does not indeed exist.
So there you go. That's the argument Pope John Paul puts forward. That these things are just articles of faith and the matter of opinion, and they believe that they're not gaps in our knowledge, but actually things that people believe in that are very important to them. But at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, as always, it's up to you.